the things as we began to plan this. Sometimes you just have an idea and you drop it on someone and they take that idea and make something beautiful that blows your imagination using their creativity and what God has given them the task. And I can't say enough. I'm going to stop talking, but I approached Clint. Clint does video, and I said, for the 160, can you just capture a little bit of something? Just capture a little bit of who we are as a faith community. And you are going to see the fruits of his labor, as I hope you enjoy it as much as I have, because I've already seen it.
All of the people here are just like family. It's not just a building. It's a family, a community.
Just being around your brothers and sisters in Christ.
Feeling closest and family.
A wonderful group of people here, and they welcomed us with open arms. They just loved me.
I find it a very loving church. All nice, kind people.
And it's still special.
The people, to me, make First Christian special.
The people, they're friendly, and I really do think it's the people that makes it special.
People? I like the people, and I like their beliefs. If I don't go to church on Sunday, I feel like I'm lost to me.
I do feel close to God here, and I come every chance I get.
Not only the people, but that this, like I said, is my home. That you can come here no matter what, no matter how many years or days you haven't been here or anything like that. You can always come here.
Probably the way everybody talks to each other. Whenever we first came here, everybody greeted us, and everybody was real outgoing and talkative to us.
I think it's the people. I think it's the sense of family. One of the things that Tommy has brought to this church is for us to think about this as a faith family rather than a congregation or members of a church. And I think it is that sense of family. And I think it's also that sense of people really rallying around a purpose and a cause, to see people's generosity, expecting nothing in return. I think those were good growth times for our church, and certainly a time that I felt God was very much alive and leading us in the direction that He wanted us to go.
In later years, it's being closer to families when they need you. The most. There's a crisis of health, usually, and you feel like you can really work with them, and that's when you really feel like you are doing His work.
Now, my son was a freshman in high school, and he had gone to school and met up with a lot of kids in the locker room, and came back and said, "Mom, these kids go to church. They go to First Christian Church, and I want to go there." I didn't have church in my life for a long time, but my son was the one that brought me back to church. I sometimes had no clue what was going on when I was sitting here, but my kids were here, they were engaged, and it's just been better and better ever since.
Family, the feeling of family, the feeling of community, the way people have cared for each other. One of the best memories I have, we had a church van, and on Christmas Eve, I went and picked up a special needs girl from the nursing home, and it was snowing, and as I lowered the snow that much. And that's one of the neatest memories that I have. This church meant so much to her, but she was dependent upon somebody to come and get her. But that was so special to me.
All through my life, when the happy times and the sad times, or the things when trouble came along, not exactly trouble, but just life's happenings, I felt closest to the faith family because my really good friends are here, and I felt the support of the people around me through those times. We've all grown together, and our family's grown up, and we've been through all the trials and tribulations of each other's lives, so there's always been a special closeness.
It's home. It's home. I was raised in this church, but this is home to me. I have felt God right here in this sanctuary. My husband died on the 23rd of December, 1989. I came to our service for Christmas Eve. I was passed from arms to arms to arms, and the hugs I got spoke more than words could ever say.
I've always felt at home ever since I got here. It has helped me grow as an individual. It has helped my faith grow tremendously. When my son first got sick, about 12 years ago now, he was diagnosed with leukemia, just like that, and Tommy was a new preacher then, and he suggested that we have a prayer service. So Steve and I came and we sat in the front pew, and slowly other people filed in, and Tommy began a prayer, and everybody else joined in. It was such an overwhelming feeling. I was really bolstered up by that through the experience. Jonathan's illness lasted 10 years, and then he passed on. But all the while, my church family here really gave us a lot of support, and during that time, I felt like God was with us all the time. Tommy's a fantastic minister, and the people here are just outstanding. And I could name so many people that have just been so kind and made us feel so at home. And I'm sure not all churches do that. I think that's the nature of this church, that you feel very close to God. I find it a marvelous place to grow and mature in my faith. At any age, there's always someone around who's a step ahead of you. I have always felt comfortable in this faith family because I was born into this church, and so this church raised me. And it's been a very strong comfort all my life, literally. The people here just grab me up and love me. They've always loved me. They love my girls. My girls have the greatest male role models in this church. I could not ever say enough about the love of this church and what they've meant to myself and my family. And we will never forget that. I don't know exactly where I would be in this life if it wasn't for this church and all the love that they've shown.
For me, this church is about the one. It's about the one, Jesus Christ, our Lord and Savior, but it's also about the one marriage that's on the brink. It's about the one single mom. It's about the one widow whose spouse just passed away. It's about the one family that has 3 kids and the wife finds out she's pregnant. It's the one job that got lost. So I always said that we're a family, a bunch of families of ones, and that's what's most important to us as a faith community. I don't know to clap or say amen, so let's do both. And for those of you that are wondering, would like to see it again, about 10 minutes after the worship service, it will be on all social media, Facebook, Twitter, our webpage as well. As soon as the service is over and I can run up to my computer, it's already loaded and hit and click. But we wanted you guys to see it first. And I think it's amazing about how God's power and Spirit works. If you were part of it, you know, or you knew that no one was around when each individual was being interviewed. And it's amazing how God has the same message from all of us, and that's what we're going to do next week, as well as God gives us a message of what God wants us to do for the next 60 years. But all of us have defining moments in our life where we describe pre and post. There are events that sort of mark time for us, and we constantly compare and contrast our life before the event and after that event. If you are married, there was a lifestyle before you got married, and there was a lifestyle after you got married. There was a lifestyle before you were diagnosed with cancer. There was a lifestyle after cancer. There was life before an addiction. There's life after with sobriety. There's life before you had children, and no life after your children. No, I'm just and life again after your children are gone and moved away. But as we listen to the stories of our faith family, I hear people mark time around here, like before the fire, before the sanctuary was burned down. I also hear markers in time about leadership, as I hear wonderful stories about our faith community, and people will say, that was the time when Pastor so-and-so came, and that was after the time, this happened and this happened. We all have markers. And we place in our memory of life before a significant event and after a significant event. And these markers remain fixtures, just hanging in our memory like beautiful paintings in a gallery. And regardless if they're memories filled with joy or memories filled with pain, we revisit them and as markers on this path of life. And today we're going to visit not only our marker as a faith community, but two important markers of the Israelites. There's two. There's before the Exodus and then after the Exodus. And so for over 400 years, the Israelites were enslaved in Egypt. God sent a deliverer, we all know, named Moses. And we've all heard of Moses. And Moses delivers the people, about 1 million of them, if you remember, out of slavery, out of Egypt. But instead of delivering them straight to the promised land, they kind of got stuck. Wandering around for about 40 years in the wilderness. And God uses Moses to lead them in circles in the wilderness. Moses dies, so God put his hand on the new leader, Joshua. And God had called Joshua to lead the people out of the wilderness into the promised land. You see, Joshua began his service to God really as Moses' spy. And he was with Moses in Mount Sinai when God gave Moses the outline of a plan of the Israel tabernacle, and God gave Moses the 10 Commandments. And although Joshua was not with Moses when Moses had to recreate the tablets because he got mad and busted the other ones, Joshua was there through every significant thing of Moses' leadership. You see, but Joshua was a warrior, and it took some adjustment to following Moses. And so the people looked for Joshua for guidance. They looked for him for safety and direction. They had put their total trust in him, and like in our world where people who are desperately wanted him to fail. But there was one thing that was key to Joshua's success. Are you ready for it? Joshua did exactly what God told him to do. That's it. The success of Joshua was his ability to listen to God and just do exactly what God instructed him to do. So we pick up this rich story as Joshua and his people are on their way to Jericho, which will be the Israelites' home, what they had waited for 40 years. 40 years. But now the time is coming. Behind them, they leave the weary decades of wandering around in the barren wilderness and the tragic memories of countless funerals of the entire generation that they had lost while they had wandered. and those who didn't trust God. You see, slavery in Egypt was just a memory to most of the people, some of them, because they were just trying to survive this nomadic life of just wandering around. And a new and a welcome chapter opens up for them as they see the promised land. But before them lies a land richer than their dreams, more fruitful than their hopes, and more beautiful than their imaginations. It's right there. But it's there by God's steadfast promise that it's right there. It must have felt surreal, if you think about it, to finally stand at Canaan. Kind of like when you unlock the door to your first home, you've envisioned it, you planned for it, you imagined what you would do with it once you got in there. But when you step in that front door, your emotions begin to soar. To be the fulfillment of an ancient promise of the father of Abraham must have been overwhelming for the people at that time. Their joy had been magnified by recent events. And when they arrived at the Jordan, they found the Jordan was at flood stage, menacing in its speed and dangerous of what it concealed. A jungle-like growth covered by the rapid current that left Israel flooded. The river was impassable, its crossing impossible. But God intervened, performing a miracle that paralleled the miracle of the Exodus of the Red Sea out of Egypt. God rolled back the waters of the Jordan, just as He had done with the Red Sea. God meant what He had said to them through Moses years before. And here was His signature move again by parting the waters in the same way. And He assured His people that He was good at His word. But then after the Israelites crossed, God gave Joshua some specific instructions. And these instructions are the ones that we need to hear and remember. So if you will, turn to me to the 4th chapter of the Gospel of Joshua in the Old Testament, beginning with the 1st verse. When the whole nation had finally crossed the Jordan, the Lord said to Joshua, "Choose 12 men from among the people, one from each tribe, and tell them to take up 12 stones from the middle of the Jordan, from right where the priests were standing, and carry them with you, and put them down at the place where you stay tonight." So Joshua called together the 12 men he had appointed from the Israelites, one from each tribe, and said to them, "Go over before the ark of the Lord your God into the middle of the Jordan. Each of you is to take up a stone on his shoulder, according to the number of the tribes of the Israelites, to serve as a sign among you. In the future, when your children ask you, 'What do these stones mean?' tell them that the flow of the Jordan was cut off before the ark of the covenant of the Lord. And when it crossed the Jordan, the waters of the Jordan were cut off. These stones are to be a memorial to the people of Israel forever." So the Israelites did as Joshua commanded them. They took 12 stones from the middle of the Jordan, according to the number of the tribes of Israel, and as the Lord had told Joshua. And they carried them over with them to their camp, where they put them down. Joshua set up 12 stones that had been in the middle of the Jordan at the spot where the priest who carried the ark of the covenant stood, and they are there to this day. Now the priest who carried the ark remained standing in the middle of the Jordan until everything the Lord had commanded Joshua was done by the people, as Moses had directed Joshua. The people hurried over, and as soon as all of them crossed, the ark of the Lord and the priest came to the other side with the people. Skip down. The day the Lord exalted Joshua, verse 14, in the sight of all Israel, and they stood in awe of him in all the days of his life, as they had stood in awe of Moses. Then the Lord said to Joshua, "Command the priests carrying the ark of the covenant to come up out of the Jordan." So Joshua commanded the priests come out of the Jordan, and the priests came out of the river carrying the ark of the covenant of the Lord. No sooner had they set their feet on dry ground than the waters of the Jordan returned to their places and stood and ran at flood stage as before. On the 10th day of the first month, the people went up from the Jordan and camped in Gilead, the eastern border of Jericho, and Joshua set up the 12 stones there that they had taken out of the Jordan. And he said to the Israelites, "In the future, when your descendants ask your parents, 'What do these stones mean?' you tell them, Israel crossed the Jordan on dry ground. For the Lord your God dried up the Jordan before you until you had crossed over. The Lord your God did to the Jordan what he had done to the Red Sea when he dried it up before us until we crossed over. He did this so that all the people of the earth might know that the hand of the Lord is powerful, and so that you might always fear the Lord your God. It's a long story. But see, after the entire nation had finished crossing the Jordan, the Lord spoke to Joshua and said, take 12 men of the people, one man from each tribe, and command them, take 12 stones from the place in the middle of the Jordan where the priest's feet were standing, carrying the Ark of the Covenant, and set them down in a place where he's on the other side. Joshua did exactly what he was told, sending the 12 men back to the riverbed of the Jordan, where they were to bring back 12 stones. Stones at one point, think about this, stones at one point were buried. Stones at one point were unreachable. Stones at one point were covered and not accessible. 12 men hoisted heavy stones on their shoulders from the Jordan's floor, and they piled them up together in the promised land by God's command. They stacked them there as a sign, an unmistakable marker at the very place where God had demonstrated his power to overcome and his obstacles to his will. And if you think about it, stones don't naturally stack. Then there would come a day when Israel children would ask for an explanation for this phenomenon. And here's the answer God wants the next generation to know. He said, tell them the story. Tell them the story of how the waters of the Jordan were cut off in front of the Ark of the Covenant. And when it crossed the Jordan waters were cut off. God instructed Joshua to place memory stones there on the bank of the Jordan. Memory stones that are still there today if you travel to the Mideast. So why are stones important? Why are memory stones important? Why are they important to us? Well, for one, there's 3 types of memory stones. First, there are the literal stones of remembrance. Literal stones of remembrance, the ones that are there even today. And God said, go get some stones from the middle of the Jordan, the very place where God's miracle happened. And these stones will serve as a reminder of God's goodness and what God has done and God is able to do in the world in which we live. These stones were not kept locked away, but placed in the center where everyone lived, where God says, when the children walk by and ask about them, you tell them the story of how God intervened and parted the waters. If you look closely, you will find our own literal stones as well. A cross on a communion table that was dug out of the rubble of a fire that burned down the sanctuary. If you walk into the fellowship hall, there's a concrete windowsill that's cracked. And the fellowship hall is a physical present reminder of the heat of that fire that burned down this congregation. But more importantly, it tells of the resiliency, it tells of the strength, it tells of the determination of this faith community as they immediately began to rebuild. They're literal stones that we find. But there's also second type of stones, there's also living stones of remembrance. And whether you realize it or not, God has placed living stones in the midst of our world today. These stones are called living stones, and you and I are these stones. God promises are kept to his people. God kept his promise, and God has fruition plays out in our world. It's played out through living stones. It plays out through us. And as I read the replies that some of you submitted, I was humbled by the way God used our people of our faith community. I read of a single mother alone with 2 children needing more financial security and to return to school. That was her only shot at providing for her children. With the world of living stones like Virginia Whitlock and a group of other people not only helped them financially support her, but living stones like Paul Shaw that would go pick up her 2 girls and made it here each and every Sunday when their mother had to work. Those are living stones. Living stones like the gum man, Roger Cruzen, who shouted for heaven, Cubs win, Cubs win. But not only did he embrace the young people, he made them feel special by each and every Sunday handing out a piece of gum to them. And no one who has been a part of this faith family for over 5 years, no one can out walk into that kitchen without feeling the haunting presence of Dorothy Moore. You just can't do it. They're living stones. Or you can't hear the bells of praise or read the words upon the sign without remembering Rosalie Wilkinson. They're living stones around us that we don't even notice. But here is the key. God is calling you and I to become those stones for others as well. Being a living stone to your children, your grandchildren, your great-grandchildren, and others in our faith community is not a spectator sport. It's active. It's investing in others. It's giving of your time and attention. It's listening. But most importantly, it is love. It's love. Loving one another with unadulterated, unmanipulated, unconditional love. Loving each other, however you define love is, as an action verb. There's literal stones, there's living stones. And last, there's stones of remembrance. Stones of remembrance and thanksgiving. I beg you to pause and think just for a moment. In our nation today, 2016, what can you name that has survived over 160 years? What is 160 years old and still functions the same way it did at its conception? What is 160 years old, and although faces have changed, although styles of worship have changed, but the foundation and the essence of who we are as a faith community is still as vibrant today as it was 160 years ago. You see, in order for us to be living stones in our society, for us to be living stones in our community, for us to be living stones in our faith community, we must remember to cultivate a culture of gratitude. A gratitude of what God has done and what God will do. And what we receive from God cannot be commonplace. Whatever we receive, it must always be viewed as a special and unique gift. And our challenge today is the fact that we live in a world of indulgence. I mean, we really do, and we no longer are amazed and grateful for God intervening in our lives in a very personal manner. We've forgotten to remember all the time God has shown up in our lives. We've forgotten to take the time to pass down that knowledge and stories down to our children and grandchildren. And what are the things God has done for you? How are you passing down your story of God's power and deliverance down to your children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren? You see, without memory stones, a community will quickly vanish. God's miraculous and powerful works will go unnoticed, and the community will perish if we don't take time to stop and remember. So cherish, notice, become a memory stone of God's intervention. Become a memory stone of God's deliverance. And be, more than anything, be a memory stone